March 24, 1945, London. Deep beneath Whitehall, in the concrete corridors of the Prime Minister's war rooms, Winston Churchill stood before a wall-sized map of Europe. Colored pins marked the final Allied drive into Germany. The Rhine River, long considered the last natural shield of the Reich, ran like a thick blue scar across the board. Churchill had been told what was supposed to happen next. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Britain's most celebrated commander, was preparing a vast, meticulously planned crossing of the Rhine. It would be called Operation Plunder, a set-piece assault designed to demonstrate British precision, discipline, and command authority at the climax of the war. Then the message arrived. An American army, George S. Patton's Third, had already crossed the Rhine, not by grand design, not by careful choreography, but by speed, improvisation, and audacity. Within hours, Montgomery demanded consequences. He accused Patton of recklessness, of undermining Allied unity, of stealing Britain's moment to victory. The demand that reached Churchill's desk was unmistakable in its intent. Patton must be fired. What Churchill said next would decide far more than one general's career. It would expose the real balance of power inside the Allied alliance, at the very edge of victory. By the spring of 1945, the defeat of Nazi Germany was no longer in doubt. The question haunting Allied headquarters was not whether Berlin would fall, but who would shape the final chapter of the war in Europe. The Rhine River stood at the center of that struggle. For generations of German planners, it had been the ultimate defensive barrier. For the Allies, it was both a military obstacle and a political symbol. Crossing it meant entering the heartland of the Reich. Doing so first meant claiming momentum, prestige, and influence over the post-war order. Bernard Montgomery understood this better than anyone. After the costly failure of Operation Market Garden 6 months earlier, his reputation had suffered. Operation Plunder was meant to restore it, an overwhelming, carefully staged assault that would place British leadership unmistakably at the forefront of victory. George S. Patton saw the situation very differently. To Patton, the war was not a sequence of planned spectacles. It was a race, a relentless pursuit, and any pause, any delay to satisfy pride or politics was a betrayal of momentum. When his scouts reached the Rhine and found it weakly defended, Patton did not ask permission, he acted. Caught between them stood Winston Churchill. Britain's wartime leader was fighting a second, quieter battle, preserving British relevance in an alliance now dominated by American manpower, American industry, and American generals. Montgomery was not just a commander, he was a symbol of Britain's standing. This is the untold story of the moment Churchill was forced to choose between alliance politics and battlefield reality, after Montgomery demanded that Patton be removed for crossing the Rhine first. The seeds of the Rhine crisis had been planted long before Patton's boats touched the far bank. Since the Normandy landings, the Allied command structure had been an uneasy compromise. General Dwight Eisenhower served as supreme Allied commander, but beneath him, authority was divided along national lines. Montgomery commanded all ground forces during the invasion phase, while American generals, Bradley and Patton foremost among them, chafed under what they viewed as excessive caution. Montgomery believed in preparation, mass, and certainty. His battles were deliberate, his advances methodical. He saw himself not merely as a field commander, but as the architect of victory. Patton was his opposite in almost every respect. He believed war rewarded speed and punished hesitation. His Third Army moved faster than any other Allied force in Europe, covering more ground in less time, often on dangerously extended supply lines. To Patton, restraint was weakness. Opportunity, once seen, had to be seized immediately. Their rivalry was no secret. Patton privately mocked Montgomery as slow and self-promoting. Montgomery viewed Patton as disorganized and politically dangerous. Each man believed the other represented a flawed way of war. Churchill knew both men well and trusted neither completely. Privately, Churchill admired Patton's aggression. "He is a great soldier and one of the most dangerous men alive," Churchill once remarked. But Patton's history of controversy, most notably the slapping incidents in Sicily, made him a liability in the political arena. Montgomery, by contrast, was dependable in public and relentless in private. He communicated constantly with London, framing military decisions in terms of British prestige and Allied balance. Operation Plunder was his chance to reassert British leadership before the final collapse of Germany. By March 1945, the plan was set. Plunder would involve over 1 million men, thousands of artillery pieces, and the largest airborne drop of the war, Operation Varsity. It would be impossible to ignore, impossible to overshadow. But war, as Patton liked to say, had no respect for plans. In the third week of March, Patton's forward units reached the Rhine, near the town of Oppenheim, south of Mainz. Intelligence suggested German defenses were thin. The river itself, wide, cold, and fast-moving, was still formidable, but not impassable. Patton saw what Montgomery did not, a fleeting gap in the enemy line, and he chose not to wait. The crossing began without ceremony. On the night of March 22, 1945, under low clouds and intermittent rain, patrols from Major General Manton Eddy's 12th Corps, part of Patton's Third Army, reached the east bank of the Rhine near Oppenheim, just south of Mainz. The German defenses were thin, scraps of Volkssturm units, scattered machine gun nests, and little artillery support. This was not supposed to happen. According to Allied planning, the Rhine crossing would come days later, farther north, under Montgomery's personal supervision. Until then, American armies were expected to hold, consolidate, and wait. Patton did not wait. When reports reached Third Army headquarters that German resistance was collapsing, Patton issued a simple order: get across. Assault boats were dragged to the water by hand. Engineers worked silently, laying the groundwork for pontoon bridges before dawn. By the early hours of March 23rd, American infantry were already on the far bank. At 9 a.m., Patton sent a message to Omar Bradley that dripped with satisfaction. In his diary, he would later write, "Brad says Monty is mad as hell about the crossing of the Rhine." Then, with characteristic bluntness, Patton added, "I hope so." The news traveled fast. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, staff officers stared at situation maps that no longer matched the plan. Montgomery's grand assault, Operation Plunder, had been eclipsed before it began. But it was in the British command structure that the shock turned to fury. Montgomery had invested months in Plunder. The operation was meant to be overwhelming: 5,000 guns, 2 airborne divisions, and a meticulously timed river assault designed to leave nothing to chance. Now, a rival, an American rival, had stolen the symbolic prize. Within hours, Montgomery dictated a sharply worded message. The crossing, he argued, was unauthorized. It endangered coordination. It undermined Allied discipline. And most importantly, it humiliated British command. Montgomery did not merely complain, he escalated. he demanded that General Eisenhower take action against Patton for what he called a serious breach of operational control. When Eisenhower hesitated, Montgomery pushed the issue higher, toward London. By the evening of March 23rd, Winston Churchill was informed that Britain's senior field commander wanted Patton removed. That night, as the cables continued to arrive, Churchill did something he rarely did during a crisis. He wrote privately. And what he put on paper, never intended for publication, reveals what he truly thought of Montgomery, Patton, and the alliance itself. Because in Churchill's mind, this was no longer about a river crossing. It was about whether Britain still had the power to command the war or only the power to protest it. The confrontation did not take place in a single room. It unfolded through cables, memoranda, and tense conversations spanning thousands of miles, from the banks of the Rhine to SHEAF headquarters to the underground offices beneath Whitehall. At the center of it all stood Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower understood the danger immediately. The Allied alliance was built on cooperation, not competition. Publicly disciplining Patton risked alienating the American command. Ignoring Montgomery risked confirming British fears that their influence was evaporating. Montgomery's message was uncompromising. Patton, he argued, had violated the spirit, if not the letter, of Allied coordination. The Rhine crossing was meant to be a controlled, unified demonstration of Allied strength. Patton's action had turned it into a spectacle of rivalry. Montgomery insisted that discipline had to be enforced now, or the alliance would fracture under competing egos. Eisenhower stalled. He replied cautiously, noting that Patton's orders allowed exploitation if conditions permitted. The crossing, while unexpected, had succeeded. No disaster had occurred. German resistance was collapsing faster than anticipated. But Montgomery was not appeased. In London, Churchill read the reports with growing irritation. He had seen this pattern before. Montgomery framed disagreements as matters of principle, but beneath them lay a deeper anxiety: Britain's diminishing role. By 1945, American divisions outnumbered British ones by a wide margin. American logistics sustained the advance. American generals increasingly dictated the tempo of operations. Churchill knew the truth, even if Montgomery could not accept it. In a private note, Churchill reflected that the Americans were now carrying the main weight of the war in Europe. The question was not whether Patton had been bold, but whether Britain could afford to punish boldness when victory was within reach. Still, Churchill could not dismiss Montgomery outright. Montgomery was a national icon. He had delivered victory at El Alamein. He embodied British resolve. To overrule him openly risked political fallout at home, where the war-weary public still clung to symbols of British command. The pressure mounted. Montgomery continued to argue that if Patton's behavior went unchecked, Allied operations would descend into chaos. He hinted, carefully but unmistakably, that British participation might be reconsidered if American generals acted independently. Now, Churchill faced an impossible choice. Option 1, side with Montgomery, discipline Patton, and assert British authority, at the risk of slowing the final advance into Germany. Support Eisenhower's judgment, tolerate Patton's aggression, and accept that Britain no longer set the terms of Allied warfare. Churchill asked for more information. Reports from the front were unequivocal. Patton's bridgehead was expanding. Engineers had secured crossings. German units were retreating in disarray. Casualties were lower than expected. Militarily, the crossing was a success. Politically, it was a provocation. In a conversation with close advisors, Churchill reportedly remarked that he had no intention of winning the war and losing the peace between allies. But he also knew that punishing success sent a dangerous message to commanders and to enemies alike. Then came the decisive moment. Churchill drafted his response. He would not confront Montgomery publicly. He would not rebuke Patton directly. Instead, he would speak in a way that preserved unity while quietly settling the matter. The message he sent made one thing clear. There would be no firing of George S. Patton. Operation Plunder would proceed as planned. Montgomery would get his set-piece crossing. His moment would still come, but Patton would not be punished for winning. The confrontation ended not with a dramatic showdown, but with a calculated refusal. Montgomery was furious. Privately, he complained that American generals were being indulged at Britain's expense. Eisenhower, relieved, moved quickly to smooth relations. Patton, for his part, remained characteristically unapologetic. In his diary, he noted simply that crossing the Rhine was one hell of a way to start a day. For Churchill, the decision marked a turning point. He had preserved Allied unity, but at the cost of acknowledging a new reality. Britain could advise, protest, and persuade, but it could no longer command. Winston Churchill's decision was delivered without theatrics. There was no public rebuke, no dramatic announcement, no declaration of victory or defeat inside the alliance. Instead, Churchill chose the most powerful tool available to a wartime statesman nearing the limits of his influence: carefully chosen words, sent privately and backed by silence. To Bernard Montgomery, the message was unmistakable. Operation Plunder would proceed exactly as planned. The airborne drops would go forward, the artillery would thunder, the British-led crossing of the Rhine would still take place, and it would still be presented to the world as a triumph of Allied coordination. But George S. Patton would remain in command. Churchill refused to frame Patton's action as indiscipline. Privately, he accepted Eisenhower's assessment that Patton had acted within the flexible intent of his orders. More importantly, Churchill recognized a truth that could not be undone. The war was now being driven by American momentum. In one internal exchange, Churchill reportedly remarked that there is no use in reproaching a general who has crossed the Rhine and beaten the enemy. It was a simple sentence, but it ended the controversy. Montgomery did not accept the outcome easily. To his staff, he complained that Patton's crossing had been allowed to overshadow months of British planning. He believed, correctly, that the symbolic center of gravity had shifted. Operation Plunder, when it came days later, was massive and successful, but it no longer carried the exclusivity Montgomery had hoped for. Patton, meanwhile, surged forward. His Rhine bridgehead expanded rapidly. Within days, Third Army was driving deep into central Germany, capturing thousands of prisoners and accelerating the collapse of organized resistance. There would be no pause, no apology, no acknowledgement of the controversy beyond a few lines in Patton's diary. Eisenhower moved quickly to stabilize the alliance. He praised Montgomery's operation publicly, emphasized Allied unity in press statements, and quietly ensured that Patton's success was framed as part of a broader, coordinated advance. The crisis was diffused, not because it was resolved, but because victory made it irrelevant. For Churchill, the personal cost was subtler. He had defended British prestige as far as circumstances allowed, but in refusing Montgomery's demand, he conceded something profound. Britain no longer dictated how the war would be fought. That authority now rested elsewhere. The decision preserved unity. It also confirmed a new hierarchy. The Rhine crossing controversy is remembered today as a footnote in the final weeks of World War II, but at the time it was something far more significant. It revealed the true structure of Allied power at the moment of victory. Montgomery believed discipline and planning should determine who crossed the Rhine first. Patton believed speed and opportunity mattered more than symbolism. Churchill understood that the war could only be won if neither man was publicly broken. By refusing to fire Patton, Churchill chose momentum over pride and unity over hierarchy. In the months that followed, Germany collapsed, the war in Europe ended, and the alliance that defeated Hitler began to fracture under new pressures. The balance of power that emerged would shape the post-war world for decades. The most revealing detail, however, lies in what Churchill never said publicly. He did not praise Patton openly, he did not rebuke Montgomery directly. Instead, he allowed events to speak for themselves, because by March 1945, events no longer waited for British approval. The Rhine had been crossed, the war was all but over, and the age of unquestioned British command had quietly passed into history. If you want to understand the human decisions behind history's greatest battles, subscribe now for more untold command decisions. And ask yourself, what would you have done in Churchill's position? Let us know in the comments.